So, everyone knows we're here for greens, gluten, and you, the sticky situation. Sticky buns are coming. This is a topic that I've been studying for years personally. I'll give you a little background. I love sandwiches. And so this was a topic that was really hard for me that I almost didn't want to find out more about because I didn't want to give up my sandwiches. So I've been reading for years, and I've known personally that gluten has not been good for me for years, in the sense that after gluten, I will get more bloating, constipation, just things that I knew that weren't right, yet I didn't want to give up what I liked. Even though I was still eating healthier gluten, quote unquote, organic and free-range gluten, it's still not good for you. So I want to spend some time obviously talking about gluten. I want to show you these two books before we get started, because a lot of the information I'm going to go over tonight comes from these two books. One is Grain Brain by Dr. David Perlmutter, a fantastic book. Really, it's all about grains. I mean, it's really all about health. A lot of the gluten information that we're going to go over tonight is from this. I think that this is one of the best books talking about some of the stuff we're going to talk about as far as brain deterioration and degradation. Highly recommend this. I have it on CD as well, so I listen to it in the car. The other author who I've studied under a long time as a chiropractor as well as a researcher, Dr. James Chestnut. And a lot of the information I give in the office is from this author, and this is a great book, The Wellness Prevention Paradigm. And we'll be talking about some dietary things, and it comes from this. And you're more than welcome to look at these, take pictures of these, and easily get these on Amazon. But I think that these are fantastic resources for you to dive into this topic further. So without further ado, let's start grains, gluten, and you. I thought that this little, did you guys read this little cartoon? The high carb diet I put you on 20 years ago gave you diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Oops. So, sorry about that. Anyone ever seen one of these? Yeah, so did I. That's what's killing us. That we listen to this, unfortunately, right? This is completely backwards. If you look at this, you look down at let's start at the top. Fats, oils, and sugars. Now, I'll agree that sugar should be still up there, and bad fats, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But fats should really be down here, almost. We should have several servings of that a day, versus the bread, cereal, rice, and pasta groups, 6 to 11 servings. We could pretty much eliminate this and live healthy. We could just live off just this. You could even eliminate the yogurt, cheese group, adding the fats, and that's really the diet that we're supposed to have. If you look at our genetics, now we haven't genetically changed in like 50,000 years, right? We've all, I mean, this is the hunter-gatherer society, right? How many people still get their food like that? What would happen actually if we were transplanted into a hunter-gatherer society? We'd die. Either a bear would get us or we would die 10 days later because we couldn't hunt or gather anything, right? I mean, the most hunting, right now we get upset if we have to stand in line at a supermarket for more than 5 minutes. These people hunt and gather, and so that's really how we genetically evolved. We genetically evolved to hunt, and which could take days, and you might not get meat for days, and you would gather during that time, and then you would get an animal, you'd kill it, and then you would eat on that for a day or two, okay? So this is where we really were. We evolved to eat wild game, seasonal plants, occasional berries, and seasonal fruits. And I think that that's interesting as well, in the sense that we're not supposed to eat fruit all the time. And I love fruit. I'm a fruitarian. I eat fruit every day. So it's still something I definitely struggle with. But the reason we're not supposed to eat fruit all the time is if you think about when fruit really blossomed or came to fruit was one time a year. And you ate it and you were done with it. Okay, so we're not going to dive too much into that, but James Chestnut, a really interesting quote I liked from him, has said, if you eat incongruently with your genes, you will express illness. So think about that. Think about how we eat today. And this is a great little comparison analysis that I like to look at. And this is from James Chestnut's The Wellness Paradigms book here. What happened to get us to where we're at? Let's think about this progression of events. We were hunter-gatherers. Then we moved into cities, right? And we became more industrialized. And instead of eating the fresh fruits and vegetables and what was hunter and gatherer, we started to eat more processed. Okay, it started with breads, and so essentially we were eating less fat and more carbs. And you think about us in cities, we're almost like animals in a zoo, right? Because we are animals. We're like animals in a zoo. What do they feed animals in a zoo? Pick an animal, a lion. What do they feed a lion in a zoo?
Raw meat.
They do. They try to match what is genetically designed to eat. They don't throw loaves of bread, McDonald's, at the lion, right? What do we eat? We go to McDonald's. We eat all this packaged junk, but as long as it says organic on it, we're like, oh, it's okay, it's organic, you know. So what's happening is even the diets that are quote unquote healthier are out of balance. And let's look at this. Let's look at a couple of the things. Omega-6 to omega-3. Anybody familiar with omega-6 and omega-3? The fats, like fish oils. Okay, so typically omega-6 is thought of as the bad fat, but you actually need omega-6, all right? But what happens is in our diet, it's a 15 to 20 to 1 ratio versus it should be a 1 to 1 ratio. You know, animal fat has omega-6, it also has omega-3. But what's happening is how we produce animals has more omega-6. We also have a very high glycemic load right now. Is anybody familiar with glycemic load? It's basically how quickly something you're eating is turning into sugar. Okay? Breads, pastas, very high glycemic load. In fact, it's higher than fruit. People don't realize that. You know, a piece of bread has a higher is a higher glycemic load than a banana, which we think of as a very sugary fruit. Okay? Versus, you know, back when we were hunter-gatherers, it was very low. Like I said, we were eating even fruit was our highest glycemic load, right? Our pH now is very acidic. pH in the body should be about 7.2-ish. Okay? Cancer cells grow better in an acidic medium. So we are becoming more acidic in all of the processed foods that we're eating. This is basically the macronutrient ratio, meaning kind of the breakdown. Right now we tend to eat about 15% protein, 40% fat, and carbs about 45%. Now, a lot of the fat we do eat right now is also not good fat, or it's higher in the omega-6. All right, we have a very high grain and dairy content versus really what we're genetically designed to eat is high protein, 30%, fat, 30%, and carb, 40%, but from fruits and vegetables. Okay, really no grain or dairy. I mean, people would ask me, don't you need grains? I said, no, you could actually eliminate it from your diet completely. Eat just fruits and vegetables and protein, nuts, you would be just fine. You don't need it at all. So the micronutrient, which means the vitamin content or the nutrient content that's in the foods that we eat is actually quite low from the amount of food that we eat. Because going back to it, we're eating all these processed foods. And then if you look at the probiotic content, well, everyone here familiar with probiotics? I spend a lot of time talking about it, okay? Very important, and we're going to wrap up with this in the end about things that you can do to help yourself. But a fraction of what it used to be, because we used to hunt and gather, eat things, you know, that were in the soil, so we would get that continual supply of it for our body. Sodium-potassium ratio, because we're loaded with sodium today, is much higher. Water purity, as you can imagine, is much more toxic today. And just basically, the toxins in our food are much higher. Okay, a lot of things you probably already knew. So the reason I wanted to address this is just to say, look, we're eating completely different than we were genetically designed to, and that's going to cause illness. That's going to cause the body to not function like it should. So, as I mentioned before, I want to dive more into gluten here, but I wanted to set the tone of where this gluten is coming from. So, gluten. Gluten is Latin for glue. It actually literally holds the wheat protein together. So, if you were to mix wheat flour and water together, okay, mix them all, you know, nice pizza dough, and then you run it under water to remove the fiber content, what you're left with is a ball of gluten. And that's what sticks inside you, and we're going to talk about that. But the goal with gluten is it gives rise when wheat mixes together. When you bake it, that gives rise. Anybody here eat gluten-free stuff? like gluten-free bread is like holy, and I'll be the first to admit, gluten tastes good. It's not, so non-gluten stuff is not nearly, it doesn't stick together as well. But that's the function of gluten, is holding things together, and that's why it's hard to enjoy some of your favorite breads and that type of thing without it. And we typically think of gluten just found in wheat, but it's actually also found in rye, barley, and spelt. And so these are the food things. What I was really surprised to find out, and we're going to address this a little bit more towards the end, is all of the other things that it's in. And just to give a prelude to that, it gives smooth texture. So it's found in gravies, and it's found in sauces. It's also found in salad dressings. More obscure than that, it's found in hair conditioner, volumizing mascara. So I had to give that up when I went gluten-free. And just body lotions. And a lot of times people say, well, I eat gluten-free, but I still use lotions. Well, skin is the largest organ, right? And we absorb things through our skin. In fact, they sell, I know, a male testosterone cream that you rub under your arm and you absorb it through your body. So to say that you're not absorbing gluten, I don't know if they've done tests on it. I'm sure they probably have, but I'm not aware of them. That you're probably absorbing gluten through these creams if you're using them. So it's not even enough to actually get it out of your diet if you're truly, really sensitive to it. So why is gluten bad? Anybody know? It does. We're gonna talk about that. Yeah.
Causes inflammation.
It does. So let's talk before we get to inflammation. Let's talk about the two kind of the things that you hear about with gluten. We're going to start with the celiac disease, sprue. There's the name of it, the common name of it. That's more specifically to the small intestine. And Grain Brain talks about this. The census was about 1 in 200 people suffer from celiac. Probably though is more like 1 in 30 people have problem with celiac. Okay, and it's more in your Northern European ancestry, and it really involves digestive things that we're going to get into in a second, versus gluten sensitivity. Somebody who is celiac is definitely gluten sensitive, but you don't have to be celiac to be gluten sensitive. And we were talking today, and so if you don't mind, I can share your son's story a little bit. Her son has been dealing with some thyroid issues, and and she's been through the gamut, right? A bunch of different doctors. And I sent him to a specialist that my wife goes to see for her thyroid. And to this point, they've been a bunch of different medications and really tried everything, tested him for celiac. He was negative, so you can eat all the gluten that you like. Anyway, long story short, he went there. Within a week, she tested him, and his gluten sensitivity number was a 6, which she's never even seen before. It's so high. So this poor kid has been eating a ton of gluten because the doctors don't test for gluten sensitive. They just test for celiac and stick him on a thyroid medication, where all this time this gluten is literally harming his thyroid. And without ever getting checked for that, it doesn't matter what medication you throw at it, right? So, what's that? He wasn't getting any better. So now he's just got switched, the medication, he's kicking gluten, and I bet he's going to experience some huge transformation. He already started feeling a little bit more energy just in a couple days.
10.
Yeah, 10. Can you imagine, go at 10? I mean, what is the rest of your life going to be like?
You're saying they don't test for gluten sensitivity?
Not typically. Not unless you, and you may be a better judge of it, unless you really ask for it.
Well, I have a celiac issue myself, so that's why I wanted my kids tested, and the pediatrician didn't even want to do that with my genetics, so I really had to push.
Why bother?
Yeah.
So it's definitely not something that's even on their radar, and if you ask about it, you probably will get pushed back until you demand it, and that's the sad thing. So let's talk a little bit about, because both of these things involve inflammation. So in your typical more gluten-sensitive celiac response, you're going to have more GI problems, the bloating, the nausea, the constipation, diarrhea. What people don't really realize, it also causes a brain fog. And that's what I want to dive into a little bit more, actually how it's damaging our neurology. And when I was mentioning this before, it leaves a sticky residue in your GI, and in the GI, it causes inflammation. So we need to spend a little time on inflammation. So, question to the group: inflammation, a good thing or a bad thing? So everybody says bad, but I will tell you that you wouldn't survive without inflammation. Why is that?
Immune system.
Indicator of something wrong.
It is an indicator of something. It's an indicator of healing. You have to have inflammation if your body's going to heal, right? The first response, a very important response, is new cells come into an area. Let's just use a simple example of a splinter in your finger. You know, you get a splinter and inflammation comes in, it heals the area, it can push the splinter out, and the body will heal. Chronic inflammation is the source of all evil, all health problems, no matter what it is: heart disease, cancer, diabetes. Everything will start with the initial inflammation that's never taken away. Okay? It's kind of, and so think of that residue in your intestine as you're constantly eating sandpaper. If you ate sandpaper once, you would probably have an upset stomach. You might scrape the intestinal lining. You'd it would evacuate from your body, and you would be fine because of the healing response. If you ate sandpaper every day, how would your intestinal tract feel? Not so good, right? So that's the same thing that's going on here. And what will happen is, as you continually have this inflammation, you start to damage your intestinal walls. And as you start to damage your intestinal walls, you get what's called leaky gut, meaning your digestive tract literally can't absorb the nutrients that you're putting in. And then you have this poor digestion, and because of this constant inflammation, and you're not able to absorb nutrients, this starts to lead to autoimmune problems. Okay? So inflammation, yes, we need it, but long-term inflammation, no bueno. Okay? It will over time. Now, inflammation is not selective, meaning you don't just get inflammation of your intestine and then it doesn't affect the rest of your body. And that's a common misconception. You don't just get inflammation in one area and not affect, because what happens is when you get, and particularly with gluten, your body creates these antibodies, okay, to the gliadin protein. And this inflammatory response, your body produces cytokines, which are an inflammatory chemical in the body, and it doesn't just stay confined to the intestine, it starts to go throughout the entire body. So gluten sensitivity, if you're sensitive to it, can affect all different organs and not even really have any effect on your digestive tract, which I found to be really fascinating. So that's why it actually can start to attack your nerve system. And that's what got me really interested. And obviously as a chiropractor, and I'm dealing with the nerve system every day, I'm like, wow, if I'm adjusting everybody and somebody's loading their body with gluten, how's their body ever going to heal itself? So this brain disease, these cytokines are released to the antigen gliadin, as I described there, and it's really, it attacks the brain. So I want to talk a little bit about this because this is really, really important to understand. We elevate these inflammatory cytokines, and is anyone familiar with the blood-brain barrier? What's that? A little bit, yeah. So the brain is so very important that there's a barrier in between it, and only certain chemicals can pass this barrier in order to prevent the brain from, if you swallow poison or whatever it is, to prevent it from really affecting the brain. So only certain things get passed. Well, these get passed. Okay, and the inflammation over time, and you'll notice in your notes there, I gave you a picture of basically a brain and a brain on gluten. And you'll notice all the white. Well, that's the inflammatory degradation of the brain due to increased gluten in the body. And it actually literally starts to eat away. So things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, autism, ALS, ADHD, all can be affected, the brain can be affected, and it can cause an autoimmune response. And we're going to get into Epi Genetics in a second because inflammation affects everybody differently, all because of the initiation with a gluten response. In fact, a lot of times you'll see in the MRI of somebody that has an MRI that has brain degradation, and maybe it's MS, whatever the case, and they get stopped with gluten, it actually starts to shrink because you actually start decreasing that inflammation. Okay? Does that make sense?
Is everyone sensitive to gluten?
So that's a good question. They estimate about 1 in 4 people are. Okay? And it's gotten worse over the years, and we're going to talk about that and why it is. But this is really important to understand because it is a silent killer. Our brain doesn't have pain receptors, right? Like our digestive tract doesn't. It has pain due to increased inflammation or distension, meaning expansion. Like if you got cut in the internal intestine, you wouldn't necessarily feel that, but because of the expansion, that's typically where we'll feel it. And due to inflammation, that's where you typically will get the pain in there. But our brain has no pain receptors. So the inflammation that's eating away at it, you actually don't feel. But later in life, these things start showing up, and you can't necessarily always undo it. So that's why it's important to learn about now. So another picture of an MRI, and you can see where these arrows are pointing. That's where it's literally eating away at the brain over time. So when I started studying this, I was like, well, okay. I mean, right now in 2011, I read a statistic that the gluten-free market is a over $6 billion industry in foods. That's huge, right? So I mean, I'm actually thankful that you can go to Jimbo's and you can buy all this gluten-free stuff. What did people do 50 years ago? I was like, well, did people actually have problems with gluten back then? So and Grain Brain gets into this, and it's kind of pretty cool. All the way back in 1887 is really when they first started to recognize the connection of celiac and foods. They didn't really know what foods at that point, but they just realized that there was a food connection. They tried all different things. In fact, in the early 1920s, it was in the US, they did a little guy here with a banana. They did the banana diet. Okay, so they found that people that had problems with celiac, if they just ate bananas, it cured them. and you laugh, but it lasted for 2 decades. That was the cure. So what was it? Was it bananas? Was they just got rid of gluten? Right? And it wasn't until 1940 that this pediatrician, the Dutch pediatrician, Dr. Willem K. Dicke, I guess that's how you say it, he connected it to wheat. And the way he connected it to wheat was that there was a famine over there, okay? And there was there was very little wheat and bread. And the mortality rate of all the children with celiac dropped to almost nothing. And then when wheat came back, spiked back up into 30%. So that's when they started studying. They're like, wow, well, that was, a very interesting connection. So maybe it's not bananas, maybe it's something else that we're eating. And that's when they started studying wheat. And that's when it was connected to the wheat in the diet. So it begs the question if we've had this ever since, early 1900s, how did we ever survive? Why didn't everybody get it? Or why wasn't it much more prevalent and known about until like 10 years ago? I mean, did you really hear about gluten-free stuff until 10 years ago? I mean, unless you were celiac, right? So what has happened, surprise, surprise, that we have been bioengineering things like wheat for over the past 30 years. And your average wheat now is 20 to 30 times more intensified with gluten than it ever used to be. So you might hear people talk about ancient grains. You can't get wheat that was produced, in the early 1900s. I mean, what was farmed back then doesn't even exist. You can't get it. And because of that, we have increased the gluten content slowly but surely over the years to produce more wheat and to feed more people, bioengineered it even more. And now we have a ton of gluten, not to mention all of the other products that we have now produced that gluten is a part of. As we talked about the sauces and the gravies and all these other things that gluten never was contained. So the average person now, the average child today, is exposed to far more gluten than even we were as kids. And I guarantee you the FDA is not going to make it any better for you. The government's not looking to produce less wheat, right? They don't care if you're gluten-free. So if we know this, why do we continue to eat gluten?
Because it tastes good.
Yeah, so I'm gluten-free, and I had a gluten-free chocolate chip cookie last night. It tasted great. You know what tastes better than a gluten-free chocolate chip cookie?
Gluten?
Yeah, one with gluten in it. It's chewy, it's soft, it's all the things that the gluten-free isn't, okay? But more so than that just the taste is actually what gluten does to you, in addition to your brain. So gluten breaks down into a mix of polypeptides that also cross this blood-brain barrier. And these polypeptides bind to the morphine receptors in your brain and produce a sensational high. So has anyone been stuffed after dinner before, but still decided to have a piece of cake? Absolutely. Gluten, man. Gluten at work. It will get you. And that's what it is. And it binds to these, and it's like, well, morphine. I mean, you know, if you've ever been in the hospital and had to have morphine, it produces a high. And that's what gluten does. So people can actually get binge eat on gluten because of that feeling. Kind of interesting, isn't it? It's where the donuts come in. Everyone knows that a donut is not good, but they taste good. So let's look at that sheet that everyone has in there and some of the foods that contain gluten. Some of these are surprising. So often things, and it jumped out at me that I really had to read labels, and I want to draw your attention to. One that was disappointing is beer. So anybody that likes beer, you can get gluten-free beer, okay?
They really make that.
They do. So they do, and not to get into beer, but not that I drink a lot of beer, but they make gluten-free beer that's produced without gluten. It tastes horrible. They make a beer that is produced and they remove gluten from it, and it actually tastes quite good. It's called omission beer, if you're looking for it. So, yeah. Like gravies, as we mentioned, hot dogs, ice cream, ketchup. Yeah. So once again, it gives things a creamy texture. Mm-hmm.
Would you see it in a label?
Yes. And when in doubt, what I have found that most things that are supposed to be healthy, if they don't have a gluten-free on it, they probably contain gluten in there somewhere.
If it doesn't actually say.
Yeah.
So they don't have to write it?
They don't have, but if you think of it, if you have a product nowadays that doesn't have gluten in it, you're usually writing it on the label because that attracts people to it, especially if you're in a health food store.
So what's left to eat?
Well, there are a lot of things. I mean, I've been pleasantly surprised. Even there's some breads that are made out of coconut flour that aren't quite as yummy, but nevertheless they still do exist. You really got to look at, because some of the easy things are your breads and your wheats. Obviously, you know those, but are the other things that are processed? Like for example, oatmeal. Oats are typically without gluten, but they're actually processed in facilities that process gluten, so they don't clean the thing, so they pick up all this gluten and it's pushed along with it. So you actually have to get oatmeal that says gluten-free. Like Play-Doh. I was shocked. Play-Doh has gluten. Not that we're eating Play-Doh, but I guess that's what keeps it together, right? Cosmetics, as we mentioned. So yeah, it's a really, and I printed, and this actually comes straight from Grain Brain. So if you get that book, it's in there. But I just found it to be a nice little list just to kind of plant that seed, so you can kind of look at some of the stuff that you're taking in, and you might be surprised how much gluten you're taking in, even if you're not eating bread. So I wanted to get into what we can do to heal our bodies. So we spent all of this time talking about what gluten does to our digestive tract, what it does to our brain, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about actually how the inflammation causes autoimmune problems and what we can do about it, and then what you can expect, and then some changes that you can make in your diet, and really what you can expect from that. So this is another topic of interest to me that I spent several years studying, and this was prior to gluten, but it all relates here. Not prior to gluten, prior to me studying gluten. It's called Epi Genetics. Anybody familiar with the term epigenetics? Familiar with genetics, right? Okay, what's a gene? Yeah, it's your DNA code. You don't get to change it, right? You get what you get, and you don't throw a fit, as my son's preschool teacher says. I'm not going to be 6'6" and play for the Lakers tomorrow. I get it. So our epigenetics is really the environment, or how the environment plays a role in our genes. So probably about 10 years ago, I think it was about 10 years ago, scientists were studying the human genome for a while, but they couldn't get it all, they couldn't see exactly what it was. They expected basically that the genes were very, very complex because it coded for all of these different things in our body. Okay? When they were able to finally get it down to the level that they could see this and break it down, they were shocked that it wasn't as complex as they thought it was. And they said, well, how do we have all these different cells, all these different processes in our body coded for by this gene set, yet it's not nearly as complex? And then they started realizing on the genes are what are called an epigenome protein coat. Okay? So I'm going to get really in depth here just for a second. Not going to overwhelm you too much. Do you guys remember back in, maybe it was biology class, and you would match up, like, I forget, it was like A to the G, and you would like transcribe do you guys remember doing this? Yeah, but it wasn't, it was even more than that. Like, you would get a DNA and an RNA, and you would kind of, no? Am I going way too far back here for some people? Yeah, that's okay, but maybe so anyway, what happens is these genes transcribe and they produce new cells, but what will sit around some of these genes are what are called these protein coats. And these protein coats will either allow transcription or not. And what that means is you can get all these different protein coats which can allow the same gene set to transcribe for different things. So, anyone here ever get genetic testing done? Did you? Okay. And it can be scary. I didn't do it because I didn't want to know all the things I was genetically destined, quote unquote, to have. But, and you may have heard it, the big one in the news was Angelina Jolie a couple of years ago, and she was genetically destined to have breast cancer. Well, she had the genetic marker for it, but it doesn't mean that she was going to get it. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that the genetic code is sitting there, okay? And we all have genetic code. I guarantee you all of us have genetic code for terminally ill things, right? What'll happen, though, is you have this protein coat that's sitting over top of a lot of these things, which either allows it to be, well, if it's sitting over top, it won't be transcribed. Therefore, it's not going to express itself in your body. Read the word phenotype up here. What is expressed by a gene is your phenotype. So quick example, your mother could have blue eyes, your father have brown eyes, and the baby is born with brown eyes because that's what's expressed. Even though that there is a gene there still for the blue eyes, the phenotype is what's expressed. Now, the cool thing about our phenotypes is 70% of them can be changed, meaning you can turn them on and off. I'm going to explain to you how this happens. If you have this protein coat and it's sitting over top of it, okay, and your cells are supposed to just replicate and this is supposed to be fine. But then you start bombarding this gene, this epigenome, with gluten, other inflammatory agents, and it starts to break it down. And now, over time, that dissolves, and what's been underneath of it now starts to transcribe. And what was underneath it was the marker for cancer, the marker for diabetes. And the reason that two people, or a ton of people, can all eat the same thing, have the same inflammatory response, but end up with different things, is because of your genes, but really it's because of your epigenome. Okay? Now let's take type 2 diabetes, because this is a great example. Type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes, right? Right? It's now type 2 diabetes, because why? Because kids get it. Why are kids getting it? Their diet. Well, it's their lifestyle. We inherit genes, but more so than we inherit genes, we inherit a lifestyle. Okay? So if you have this protein coat, and you've been bombarding it with junk for a long time, it dissolves away, and by the age 60, now you have type 2 diabetes, and that's being expressed, okay? Well, what will happen is if a child is in this same lifestyle and is bombarded with it, it can be expressed a whole lot sooner. But what also can happen is, let's say this protein coat has dissolved before you procreate. Now, the child is not born with that protein coat on the epigenome, and they're susceptible from day one. So the fact that we have quote unquote better healthcare than we ever have had in the past, yet more people are sick, more children are sick, our mortality rate in children is horribly high compared to other industrialized countries, is because of what we're doing to our body and to our genes. We're literally affecting our genes, what we're passing on to our kids every day. Now, the cool thing about epigenetics is that you can undo it. You can actually, let's say you are born without that epigenome, but you actually change your diet, you live a really healthy lifestyle, you can actually form these protein coats back. And I think that's the coolest thing. That's why twin studies are exceptionally surprising to me and really intriguing to me, because two genetically identical people can have completely different responses to life, all based upon their epigenetics or their lifestyle. And two very different genetic people can have the exact same based upon if they have the same lifestyle. So what plays more of a role in what you're destined to have? Your genes or your lifestyle? Absolutely. All the time. Okay? I think it's very interesting.
I always wondered why little children less than a year old, can get such major diseases when they're not exposed like you are, for decades. And that answers it right there.
Think of all the things that a child is exposed to now, but it wasn't before.
Right, if they're born with a gene that's going to be
Yep.
that sensitive that early on.
Yep, absolutely. They stand no fighting chance. So, this begs the question of, how do we live differently? And these are things that I preach all the time. But let's look at the bottom one here. After this, please do something about your gluten intake. I'm not saying, as you probably know, I went gluten-free in the beginning of this year. I said enough is enough, and it was actually Christmas cookies that took me over the edge. I know that's sad, but my wife makes such good Christmas cookies, and just one day I was hurting so bad, I'm like, this is ridiculous. I love them, and that's not saying I went on vacation recently and I had a little bit of gluten, but for what I've adopted as a lifestyle is to go gluten-free. Okay, I haven't changed any exercise habits. I haven't changed, I've changed my food intake, and how it's changed my food intake is that, now, obviously, I'm not eating gluten, so it's eliminated things like bread, but even still, I still have some sandwiches. But what it does is it eliminates these things that will cause inflammation, and so you end up substituting something else. It tends to be fruits and vegetables. Surprise, surprise. And the things that you eat that are gluten-free, that are kind of like the substitute, well, they're much smaller. Anyone ever eat a gluten-free cracker versus a regular cracker? Gluten-free cracker is a whole lot smaller. And even the bags of stuff that you buy, like gluten-free chips versus regular chips, are a whole lot smaller. And they cost they cost more. So the good news is you tend to eat less junk because you're not going to eat all these processed things. You're going to eat more fruits and vegetables. And in doing so, I didn't go into it to lose weight, but I think I lost like 6 pounds in a month and a half. My brain feels a whole lot clearer. And I just have more energy. So just by doing that, just by changing your gluten intake, if you can eliminate or drastically reduce it, I guarantee if you're looking for a health change, that would be a big step. In addition to that, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, if you remember that flow chart, you had the average diet, and you had the hunter-gatherer diet. Well, we were deficient in a lot of things. Here are a couple things, the probiotics, the fish oil, the vitamin D, and the coconut oil, that all help bridge that gap at least a little bit, okay? So probiotics, everybody knows what they are. You should be taking a probiotic every day, okay? I recommend the one that has at least 15 billion microorganisms every day. It is to help your digestive tract. It is to decrease inflammation in your digestive tract. It helps your immune system. And a lot of people don't realize this, but our digestive tract is known as our second brain. It produces more serotonin than our brain does. And it gets the brain, and serotonin is really important for feeling well, good mental function. So one of the best things, everyone from birth on should be taking a probiotic, okay?
Question.
Yeah.
As far as what kind of probiotic should be vegetarian, or can it be like goat, based on goat milk, or?
And so there's a lot of different, you have to grow the probiotic in some sort of medium. Okay, I personally, I take the one we have, it's a gluten-free, dairy-free one. I like that. But yeah, they'll either grow it on a soy base, they'll grow it on, so that's grown on soy, but it's a non-GMO, you know, so it has to grow on something. They can grow it on a dairy product. And so as long as it's not, if you're not, you know, dairy's not the best for you, but if as long as you're not overly sensitive to it, it's okay to get. You know, you want to make sure you get a good one, and you want to make sure you get one that is not, you know, like I always tell people, don't go to Costco. Avoid the 2 C's, Costco and China for supplements, right? Because there's just the lack of regulation and stuff coming from China, and Costco, because it's such a big warehouse, and some of these things are pretty fragile when they're shipped. You know, fish oils and probiotics being one of those. Yeah, temperature regulation is important. So a probiotic, very important. EPA, DHA, fish oil. Fish oil, 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day, really helps reduce inflammation in your body. It's also the DHA is very important brain food. So everyone should be on that. It helps restore, you know, the inflammatory agents that are attacking our brain. The DHA helps combat that, helps our brain heal. So DHA is very important. That's why they tell mothers, you know, pregnant mothers, they have to have a lot of DHA because it's very important for neurologic development. Vitamin D3 should really not be called a vitamin, should be a fat-soluble hormone. Okay, vitamin D3 is so very crucial for you. Okay, it is true that you can be in the sun and you can, you know, make your own vitamin D3 or vitamin D. Most people aren't in the sun enough. Okay, and in addition to that, it does require a process by the liver. Some people have toxic livers, and they're not producing enough. So it's very common in our society that our vitamin D levels are low. Vitamin D also supports the enzymes in our brain and cortical spinal fluid. So that's why I push vitamin D3, because it helps protect that, and it's a very important part of playing in your immune system function. So low vitamin D3 can also cause problems with depression, cause problems with your immune system, and very, very important. And last on this list that I find to be, this is a great source of fats, is coconut oil. Coconut oil you can use on your skin too. A lot of people rub it on their skin, around their eyes. They say, oh yeah, makeup remover. Yeah, it's fantastic. So it's really wonderful for your body, and it's really, really great for your brain. So I recommend you put it on. You can put it on a piece of gluten-free bread if you like. You can put it on in your smoothie. However you want to get it in, I recommend trying to get at least a tablespoon plus a day of coconut oil. You know, and so, you know, all in all, why do I care about these things? Why am I here tonight to do this? Well, you know, if you think about what I see day in and day out, most people come to me initially with a pain or a problem, and I talk about the nerve system, and I talk about, and sometimes that goes, you know, it's a lot to comprehend at first. But what I find over time is the people that are staying healthy are really actually paying attention to these small things in their lifestyle. And it's supporting their nerve system. Their body doesn't fall out of balance nearly as fast. If you go home and you load up on toxins, I can guarantee you're going to fall out of alignment, you know, within 2 days. Doesn't matter how many times I adjust you. And so for me as a chiropractor, it's rewarding, and it's my personal mission to help people stay in balance and see me for the good things, not just because they're in pain. These small things here are fantastic for your neurology. I think it's very, very important. So that's why I'm here.